Genesis 44:14. When Judah, who's one of the brothers, and his brothers came to Joseph's house, because Joseph has his own house in Egypt, he was still there. They fell down before him to the ground, and Joseph said to them, "What deed is this you have done?" So everybody pay attention. They've already come down once to get food. On their way out, Joseph hides a silver cup in the bag of Benjamin, one of the youngest brother, because he wants to test to see where they're at, the hearts of his brothers are at. So they get found out that Benjamin has Joseph's silver cup in his bag of grain, and they're all brought back to Egypt because they were halfway home. They're all brought back to Egypt, and now Joseph is questioning them about why they would steal from him. "What is this deed you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination?" So Joseph is making the point that I'm connected to God. And Judah said, "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak, or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and also whose hand the cup has been found," speaking of their youngest brother Benjamin. But he said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go in peace to your father." So he's basically saying, I'm keeping Benjamin here as my slave. Everybody else is free to go home. Verse 18, then Judah went up to Joseph and said, "O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word to my Lord's ear, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a younger brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead." So he's speaking of Benjamin, that Benjamin's brother, his close brother, Joseph, is dead. So he's speaking to the guy who's saying he's dead, but he's actually alive right in front of him. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. Circle that. His father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me that I may set my eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, the boy cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. Then you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall not see my face again. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And when our father said, go again, buy us a little food, we said, we cannot go down again. If our youngest brother goes with us, we will go down. For we cannot see this man's face if our youngest brother is not with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me. And I said, surely he has been torn to pieces, speaking of Joseph, and I have never seen him since. If you take this one, speaking of Benjamin, also from me, and harm happens to him, you will bring down my gray hairs in evil to Sheol, or the grave. Now therefore, as soon as I came to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us then, as his life is bound up in his life, in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now therefore, please, underline verse 33. Now therefore, please, let your servant, speaking of himself, remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back to his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that I would find from my father. Genesis 45:1. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, make everyone go out from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud, so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Underline verse 3. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. And they came near, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold, circle sold, into Egypt. Underline verse 5. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God, circle God, sent, circle sent me before you to preserve your life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still yet 5 years in which there will neither be plowing nor harvest. Underline verse 7. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth and to keep you alive with many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but who? But God. Circle God. Woo! If you got your notes, pull them out. They should be in your bulletin. Number 1 is this. God has a plan to test Joseph. You ever felt tested by God? Anybody ever felt tested by God? 13 people have felt tested by God. Sweet. Guess what? We're going to take a journey into Joseph's life. I jumped in literally right in the middle of his life, so I'm going to do a little background so you understand. But we're going to walk down one of the gnarliest situations of what has happened to a man that God has allowed. When disruptions happen, listen to me. When disruptions happen, how do you respond? We're going to take a look at some of the most extreme disruptions that God ever allowed a man to go through. And his response to those disruptions will speak to us and how we should respond in our own lives. Number 1 is this, though. God has a plan to test Joseph. As a spoiled son, anybody ever been the spoiled one in the home? Okay, that doesn't surprise me. Okay. Some of us have been the spoiled ones. We're like, we were daddy's favorite. I'm the most beautiful. I'm the most amazing. And all the rest of the brothers and sisters. If you were not the special one, if you were like the kind of half ugly brother or whatever that, had no athletic ability or whatever, you couldn't even fix a computer. Like you're basically worthless to everybody in the world. And dad knew that. And he always told you, you're kind of worthless. When you looked at the beautiful sister or the ugly rest of your family or whatever, you're like, you try to compare yourself to the rest. Like, I'm not as ugly as that brother. I'm not as ugly. But he's the best looking brother. Let's be honest about it. So you in your mind go, as a brother or sister, you start to play comparison games, and anger and bitterness can start to dwell in your own heart about your family dysfunction. Well, guess what? Welcome to Dysfunction Junction. In this story, you got a guy named Jacob, the father. Everybody pay attention so you understand. You don't get lost. There's Jacob. Ready? He has 2 wives. That's the beginning of dysfunction. There's a reason you should only have 1 wife, which are many, which I won't get into now, but just have 1 wife, okay? Jacob has 2 wives. With 1 wife, he has 10 sons. With the other wife, he has 2 sons. One of them Joseph, and the other one, Benjamin. Joseph is the oldest one of the wife he loves the most. So he loves Joseph the most of any of the brothers. He sends the 10 older brothers out to take care of his flocks. They're like 100 miles away from home. He sends Joseph one day out to go meet them. And you know what he made for him on that journey? Was a coat of many colors. This is the famous story if you've ever heard the coat of many colors. Joseph is that guy. He shows up to his brothers wearing basically royal robes. And they're all shepherds. And he shows up going, hello. Hello. Hello, my brothers that are working hard, eating dust out here with the sheep. I just came to bring you some food. And I might want to draw your attention to me, who happens to be wearing this robe that Dad made. Oh, he didn't make you one. That's because Dad loves me. Watch, the brothers see Joseph coming from miles away with his shiny little sparkly coat or whatever. And just like you, they'd be like, here comes Joseph. Here comes Daddy's favorite. Here comes Daddy's favorite. Oh, you're the best. Oh, you're the beautiful one, Joseph. So you know what they start to say, just like you would? What are we going to do about Joseph? And you know what they say? They hate him so much. Jacob has created so much dysfunction among the brothers. They go, let's kill him. They're going to kill their own brother. And then one of them, Judah, goes, you know what? Why would we kill him when we can make money off him? So he shows up, they tear his robe off that Dad made him, they throw him in a pit, and they wait for slave traders to come by. They pull him out of the pit. They sell him. They sell their own brother. And Joseph ends up in Egypt. No fault of his own, ends up in Egypt. As the spoiled son, Joseph had a rough past of being hated and kidnapped by his 10 older brothers. He was then sold as a slave. He was then falsely accused of rape while he was in Egypt. And then he was thrown into an Egyptian prison for years because of it. Watch this. Joseph loses his coat, thrown in the pit. His own brothers make money off him by selling him to slave traders who are on their way to Egypt. He shows up in Egypt, gets bought off the auction block by a guy named Potiphar. He ends up in Potiphar's house. He becomes one of the slaves in Potiphar's home. So he goes from daddy's favorite to the bottom of the chain in Egypt. But guess what? He serves so well in the house that Potiphar makes him the head of his whole house. So instead of going, I give up, I'm not going to follow God, he works hard, even as a slave in the home. And he excels so highly that Potiphar goes, I'm going to put you over my whole house. I trust you with my whole house. The only thing that you are not over, the only person you can't speak to is my wife. Like he trusts him with everything. That's how much integrity Joseph has. So Joseph's being put to the test. I want to show you this story in Genesis 39, verse 6. Look what happens here. So Potiphar, Genesis 39, 6 through 20. So Potiphar left all he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. So here you got Joseph. He's daddy's favorite. He's super good looking. All the ladies look at him and go, oh snap. Why don't all guys look like that? Like he's the guy you flip through like GQ and you're like, snap. Look at that guy. Like that guy's looking good. Joseph's that guy. So you think, oh, Joseph's got his life planned out for him. It's going to be sweet. He's going to like flow right through life. Nope. Ends up as a slave in Egypt. But he doesn't give up. He goes, you know what? I'm going to work hard, even in the situation I'm in. Potiphar then puts him over his whole house. But then we got a little more family drama to work through. Verse 7. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept anything back from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her or lie beside her or even be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work and none of the men of the house were in the house, she caught him by his garment saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and he fled out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of the household and said to them, see, he, speaking of her husband, has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment here, and he fled out of the house. And she laid up his garment by her until the master of the house came home. And she told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew servant who you brought here among us came in to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke, this is the way your servant treated me, his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where his king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Think about Joseph. He gets sold by his own brothers. He ends up in a house and he's like, well, I'm going to make the best out of this situation. He works so hard. Potiphar goes, you're kind of a stud. I'm going to put you in charge of everything. Just don't touch my wife, son. Joseph's like, cool. While Potiphar's gone, wife tries to seduce Joseph. Imagine Joseph's situation now. Joseph could be like, you know what? Why not? She's not going to say anything. She's not going to say she's sleeping with a slave. So why would I not do this? You want to know the reason you wouldn't do that? Is because Joseph fears God. He doesn't say, I'm scared of getting caught by your husband. He doesn't say, I'm scared of going to jail. He says, why would I do wickedness and dishonor God? And so now Joseph gets falsely accused of rape, gets put in an Egyptian prison where he basically starved to death. And in prison, look at this, in prison, he shows himself so exemplary in prison, the prison guard puts him over the whole prison. He's gone from, hey, check me out. Check out my sweet jacket. Don't you love me, everybody? Everybody's like, I hate you. I hate you, brother. You end up a slave in Egypt. You're like, well, I'm going to do the best I can here. And he puts him over the whole house, falsely accused of rape. Ends up in prison, in a pit in prison. And he goes, well, might as well work hard while I'm here. And the prison guard makes him the head prisoner over all the prisoners. And by a miracle of God, God gives him the ability to interpret a dream. And so he's lifted out of prison and brought before the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh makes him second in command over all of Egypt. That's where he's at in Genesis 44. And here's my principle, ready? Disruptions are the tools of God to either make you better or bitter. You want to talk about a guy that could have been bitter? Holy cow. You want to talk about a guy falsely hated, unneedingly hated by his brothers, falsely accused of rape, ends up in prison, probably going to die in prison unless God does a miracle. And God does a miracle and pulls him out. And he becomes one of the greatest leaders in Egypt's history. This probably happened during the 12th dynasty. So if you know anything about the 12th dynasty in Egypt, that was where the majority of the pyramids came from, the Sphinx, the things that still exist to this day. That was pretty much when the time frame when those were built. So Joseph rises up during one of the strongest times of Egypt's history to be second in command under the Pharaoh. Ready? Disruptions are God's tools to either put you to the test. Are you going to get better and become more of a godly man or a godly woman? Or are you just going to become bitter and give up? Disruptions are the tools of God. And you know what's sad? Our lives have never even touched the disruption that Joseph felt. And what's sad is that many of us are already giving up on God because our 401k bombed, because we lost our job, because we're having marital issues, or we didn't get to go back to school and we're just stressed out about that. And we just kind of go, God, I give up. If you really love me, these things wouldn't be happening. And you know what? You know what that shows when you give up? It shows how weak your faith is. Because listen to me. You want to know why God allows disruption? It's because it puts your faith and my faith to the test. Do we really love God, or do we just love ourselves and we just love God when he does the things we want him to do? And that's immaturity, right? It's immaturity that says, God, I love you as long as you do my stuff. And when God doesn't do our stuff, then we go, whoa, I'm really off balance here. Disruptions are the tool of God to put your faith to the test. For all of us. By interpreting dreams, Joseph then became the highest leader next to Pharaoh. And during a worldwide famine, he controlled much of the world's food supply. Sometimes God uses powerful disruptions to put us in powerful places. Woohoo! Think about this. Here's the good side. Ready? Sometimes God messes with your life so that he can do something amazing after it. So watch this. Sometimes God does a huge disruption to make a pathway for you to do something huge for the kingdom of God. Sometimes God puts a nuclear bomb in the middle of your life so that after the bomb goes off, you come through as gold. Listen to me. The disruptions of God are not God hating you. The disruptions of God are a tool to test where you are at in your relationship with God. When you come through difficulty with God, You now become a more mature man, a more mature woman of God that God now blesses. The disruptions of God are not built to destroy you. The disruptions of God are built to put your obedience to the test so that God, who wants to bless you, can bless you on the backside of obedience. It's like when your kids do the thing that you ask them to do, which hardly has ever happened, right? It's like, man, it's like I talked about last week. Like when your kids do what you want to do, man, you're just like, Jesus, you're real. I can't believe my kids did it. And you want to bless your kids because you love them. Because they passed the test. They did what you asked them to do. And that's the exact same way God feels about us. God loves us. Disruptions are God's tool to say, are you going to walk with me through the difficulty? No, I'm not going to. I'm going to stand here. I'm going to sit down in the darkness and just be mad. I'm just going to be bitter and angry and stay here. Well, then that's all you get. Bitter and anger and immaturity. But if you go, God, I want to learn to trust you, and he takes you through the darkness and leads you through the light. Number one, God has a plan to test Joseph, and God tests our lives financially, relationally, spiritually, educationally. All of us are put to the test right now. Politically, how many of you guys watched our presidential debate? Holy Christmas, Jesus help. I don't even care how you're going to vote. I don't care what side of the political spectrum you land on. When I saw that presidential debate, I said, out of 320 million people, this is the best we got. I mean, honestly. Now, I get it. I get what's at stake in the presidential election. I get it. I'm not stupid. But here's my point to you. If you're waiting for politics or some president to give you peace and joy and security, you are barking up the wrong tree. You are trusting in the wrong thing. Listen to what I'm saying. I am pro-politics because that's often how God rules nations. So I want godly people in politics. I'm good. I'm pro-voting. I'm pro-vote the way God wants you to vote. I'm pro that. Here's my point though. The way I hear some of you speak, the things I see some of you put online, it's like you're putting all of your hope in who becomes president. And if that person doesn't become president, then you get depressed and you're like, we can't go on and I'm going to be miserable for the next 4 years. Get the heck over it. Dude, Jesus is in control. I am pro doing the right thing, voting. I'm pro that. But I'm not pro saying that's where my hope is. Because there's going to be some serious disruptions either way you look at it for the next 4 years. So learn to live in disruption, but learn to follow God in the disruption. I move on. Number two. That was free. Number one, God has a plan to test Joseph. God has a plan to test your life and my life. Number two, Joseph has a plan to test his bros. Uh-oh. You ever want to test your siblings to see what they think? Maybe you don't want to know what your brothers and sisters think of you. But Joseph does, and he puts them to the test, and that's where we are at in Genesis 44. Later, in response to a famine, so after they sold Joseph into slavery, the brothers later, in response to a famine, Joseph's brothers without Benjamin go to Egypt for food, believing Joseph's dead. Not realizing they're actually dealing with Joseph, they buy grain from him, but Joseph accuses them of being spies. So they leave Simeon, one of the other brothers, in prison in Egypt while they return to their dad. So this is previous to Genesis 44. They've already gone back and forth once buying grain. So they left Simeon in prison because Joseph says, I want to see this guy named Benjamin. Because he wants to see his youngest brother. And the brothers are like, why does an Egyptian ruler want to see our youngest brother? They're totally blown away. Like, what? This doesn't even make sense. Why do you care about our brother? Well, you do if that's your brother. Holding Simeon as a hostage in Egypt, Joseph tells them not to return without Benjamin. Arriving home, they beg their father Jacob to let Benjamin go back to Egypt with them. In fear of losing Benjamin, though, Jacob refuses and leaves Simeon, his other son, in Egypt until the food runs out. You want to talk about dysfunction, junction, family drama? Wow, you think your family's got some issues? Like Jacob needs some family counseling. He already makes competition happen between his brothers and sisters, or between his sons and daughters. And then he's so protective over Benjamin. He thinks Joseph's dead, so he's so protective over his other little baby boy that he neglects loving his other 10 sons, and they hate it so much that they come back to Joseph or Jacob and they go, we have to take Benjamin back to Egypt. I don't know why this random guy in Egypt wants to see our youngest son. I don't know. We have to take him back. We're going to starve to death. And by the way, Simeon, your other son, is a slave in Egypt at the moment. And you know what Jacob does? But let's think about this for a little bit. Literally months go by until they run out of food. And Jacob goes, I guess we better go. Poor Simeon. He's probably sitting in jail or whatever in Egypt going, oh, I'm sure dad's coming. I'm sure they're on their way. No, months and months go by. That's how much his dysfunctional love for one son was. Finally, starvation forces Jacob to let Benjamin go when he should have trusted God much earlier. Ready? Here we go. Fear and faith are tested during disruption. Are you scared? Scared about your finances? Scared about your business? Scared about losing your house? Scared about losing the car? Scared about your marriage not being able to make it through this season? Scared about where your kids are going to go to school? Scared about moving to Texas and having hurricanes every year? Scared? Listen, ready? In disruptions, that's when God puts your fear or your faith to the test. We have a choice during difficulty. I'm scared. Let me run to God, or I'm scared. I'm going to trust myself. Who do I trust? Do I trust me or do I trust God? Here's our principle. Fear births anxiety, which breeds paralyzation to God. But faith births assurance, which breeds productivity for God. Fear paralyzes you and makes you unproductive for God. When you step away from God, you freeze in your fear about the situation, about your disruption. But when you step out in faith, going, God, I'm going to trust you through this difficult time, you'll be amazed how God gives you peace and guides you through the difficulty rather than you just sitting in the difficulty. I want you to understand something. Like for Joseph, he goes from dad's favorite to being sold as a slave to being in Potiphar's house, falsely accused of rape. And this is interesting even from Joseph's standpoint that Potiphar, he must have known that his wife was a little bit hard to say in a family service. Because here's the thing. Potiphar has so much power that if he knew that a slave had attempted to rape his wife, he'd be dead. The fact that he puts him in jail tells me that because he must have known his wife was sexually aggressive and that there's probably something, husbands in the back of their mind go, oh, my wife is the way she dresses, the way she talks, the way she's... I think Joseph might have got set up. But I can't let this go. So Potiphar's stuck. And he has to get rid of Joseph, even though he probably loves Joseph. He put him over his whole house. But you know what I love about Joseph? Joseph goes, I'm going to serve God even if I'm falsely accused. I'm going to serve God even if my brothers sell me. I'm going to serve God even in jail. There's no disruption that will keep me from serving God. That's what the point I want to get across to you. There's no disruption. What's the greatest disruption that can happen? I lose my job. I get thrown in jail. I get sold by my brothers. I get falsely accused of raping somebody. Everything's wrong. Literally, I've done nothing wrong and everything's wrong in my life. At what point do you say, I no longer serve God? At what point do you say, this disruption has overtaken my life? I have no more faith. Because Joseph serves as an example that, you know what, when you serve God all the way through disruption, God will honor you. God will bless your life. Lastly, number 3. Number 1, God has a plan to test Joseph and our lives with disruption. Number two, Joseph has a plan to test his brothers. And lastly, number three, Joseph has a plan to bless his brothers. Woo! When is the last time you blessed people that hated you? You're like, I can't even understand what you just said. I don't understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. When's the last time? Think about the person who hates you the most. Think about the person you have the most drama with right now. Could be a spouse, could be an old business partner. Think about the person that goes, it's right away in your mind. Like the minute I say that, you go, okay, it's that person. The person you have the most drama with in your life. Could be from past issues, past abuses, past whatever. When is the last time you said, how can I bless that person? I can almost guarantee you this, you've never said that. And let me ask you a question, why is that? And your defense is going to be somewhere along the lines of, because they don't deserve it. Simply because I hate them. Like you don't bless people you hate. Ready? Let me lay something on you and I'm done. If you don't learn to forgive, you will always live in the jail of bitterness. The jail of bitterness is locked from the inside. The jail of bitterness is locked from the inside. So God gives you the key and he says, when you are ready to live as a man or woman of God, you can unlock the door and forgive and move on. If you do not want to, then you stay in jail with that key and go, I'm going to hang on to my bitterness and anger literally the rest of my life, and I don't care. And you know what happens? The less you forgive, the less you mature. And the less you mature, the more disruptions keep you from following God. Lastly, Joseph has a plan to bless his brothers. The second trip back now, Joseph threatens to keep Benjamin. So now the second trip back, they're like, oh, yay, we picked up Simeon, now we can go back home. And Joseph goes, you know what, I think I'm going to keep Benjamin. And now the brothers are like, what, no? Like, no, you can't keep Benjamin. So Joseph is just yanking their chain. I love me some Joseph. That's stuff I would pull off. You know what? I think I'm just going to keep Benjamin. And here's the thing. When you're a man of power, Joseph's a man of power. He's literally second to Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh controls all the world's food at this time. And Joseph controls who gets food, which is why they're standing in front of Joseph. Imagine having that kind of power. I literally decide if you eat. And you know what Joseph could have been? He could have been, hey guys, guess what? I'm Joseph. And you know what else is exciting? These guys that are standing around guarding me are going to take your heads off. Because I hate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of you. Welcome. Welcome to literally my kingdom, boys. You sold me as a slave, and guess what? The last view you're going to have of me is somebody taking your head right off your shoulders. But you know what? Ready? Bitterness says, I want vengeance. Forgiveness says, I want justice. Justice and vengeance are two different things. Vengeance is a false idea that when something bad happens to you, I'll feel better. Justice says, if wrong has been done, let's correct it, but I'm not going to live in bitterness because I'm not God. Justice and vengeance are not the same. Justice is a correction of a wrong. Vengeance is an emotional, I hope you die. And when you die, I'll feel better. But you know what's crazy about vengeance? Even if Joseph, who had guards all around him, which is why he had to tell everybody to get out, because he's guarded. Joseph's rolling heavy. Like men of power are scary. And you sense men of power. And Joseph's that guy in this story. This is why he could have literally said to those guys, I want you to take all these guys' heads off and put them out in the sand. And they would have gone, okay. And those guys would have been gone, and you would have never even heard of Joseph's 10 brothers. And you know what? Joseph would have got vengeance, but he still would have lived in bitterness. Because bitterness doesn't go away when you get vengeance. Bitterness goes away when you give forgiveness. Ready? Because we live in a cancel culture, which means, oh, you said something wrong, or that I didn't like that, well, I'm going to tweet about it. And if I get enough people that are irritated about it, you just get canceled. Your show gets canceled, your business gets canceled, all this stuff. We live in a culture of no forgiveness, no repentance, we live in a culture of bitterness and anger and hatred. And you know and that's okay if you're the person that never gets touched, but wait for the day when somebody comes and cancels you. And you're going to hate the culture you helped create. How much better it is when we live in forgiveness. Because we need forgiveness. And the way forward in freedom is forgiveness. Being that he guaranteed Benjamin's safe return to Jacob, Judah begs to let himself remain a slave in place of Benjamin. Genesis 37:26. You know who was the one who had the idea of selling Benjamin as a slave? Judah. And you know what Judah says now that Benjamin might stay a slave? He goes, I will stay in place of Benjamin. All of a sudden we see this heart transformation by Judah. He's willing to sacrifice himself so Benjamin can stay with his dad. Imagine how bitter Judah must have been, but instead he said, I'm going to stay a slave so that Benjamin can go back to his dad, even though I know dad loves Benjamin more than he loves me as a son. And that's the reason Joseph broke down in tears. And he told all his guards to get out. And then he tells all his brothers, imagine this thing. Judah's like, hey, listen, I will stay here a slave if you just let Benjamin go home to his dad, because honestly, dad's going to die. And dad loves Benjamin more than the rest of us. I'm just going to be honest. Imagine the humility that finally developed in Judah. And then Joseph goes, I can't believe it. My brothers have changed. I put them to the test and they passed. And then he reveals, hey, I'm Joseph, the guy that you sold into slavery. And he wanted to bless his brothers, and that's what he does. Ready? Forgiveness is freedom for the forgiver and the forgiven. Forgiveness is freedom for me when I forgive you if you've sinned against me. And also, if I've sinned against you, if I ask for forgiveness of you and you forgive me, now, both for the forgiver and the forgiven, we are now free. But bitterness just creates jail cells that you never leave. It's a disruption that you go, I can't move. Yeah, you can. By the power and the grace of God, you can forgive and be set free to be the man or woman of God you've been called to be. I leave you with this. Living for God isn't measured by what happens to you, but how you respond to what happens to you. Woo-hoo! How's that for 10 a.m.? Come on. Look at that. Ready? You want to talk about disruption? Here it is. Living for God isn't measured by what happens to you. Stuff's going to happen to you. You could get sold into slavery. You could get falsely accused of rape. You could end up in jail, starving to death in a pit. Stuff's going to happen to me, to you, to other people. People are going to sin against you. You're going to sin against other people. Listen, the way forward isn't, I'm angry, I'm bitter, it all has to be my way. The way forward is, God, use this disruption to make me a godly person. Build humility in me so that I can honor you, so that you can bless my life. The way forward to blessing isn't saying, what's in it for me? The way forward to blessing is saying, what does God want out of me? And then doing that thing, and then because God loves us, he blesses us. Living for God isn't measured by what happens to you, but how you respond to what happens to you. So my encouragement to you today as we leave is this. If you've got issues with people in your life, if you're in emotional bondage to things you haven't forgiven in other people's lives, set yourself free and forgive those people. Tell them you forgive them because God has forgiven you. Be a man or woman of grace. You and I want grace in our lives, and we need to extend that to others as well. It doesn't make everything okay. Sometimes people say this, I can't forgive that person because of past abuse in my life. And I know if I say, I forgive you, then it's going to make everything okay. Forgiveness doesn't make everything okay. What it does is it makes everything okay for you. Woo! Light and fluffy on a Sunday morning.